All right, we're going to get into lesson number 3. And so the first thing that we need to do is we need to turn off our streaming, set it to blueprint, turn off our visibility, and open up level 3, make current. This is one of my favorite lessons. We get to do something really fun with our watermelons. So I think this one's really exciting. So again, those first few steps, just changing those streaming modes, making sure you're setting it to always loaded, making it your current, all the things to make sure that you're doing things right. So the first thing they want you to do is just to hit the 3 key and hit play. So you can see we've got a funnel and we're using a wedge in this scene. So we're going to see that our watermelon misses the tip of our wedge when we hit play. So we need to scoot it over. So we're going to grab it. We're going to scoot it over just a touch so that it should be right in the middle. If we hit play again, our watermelon still doesn't split. I'm actually going to scoot mine over just one more tick. And that's because our cheese is not sharp enough. So we have in our details panel a sharpness value. The only way they want us changing this is through our blue diamond that we started to get used to here. And so if we get it above 0.9 or 0.8, we are good. We get a sharp enough cheese to cut our watermelon. So we're going to scale that in, and then we should see our watermelon slice in half, which is kind of fun. So our first activity is to make more of a mess here. So they want you to duplicate your watermelon using what you remember from last time and make sure that they both go through the funnel. So go ahead, pause here, try that out, and then we'll see how we can do that. So again, to duplicate, we hold our Alt key, drag off to the side, because I know that they need to be offset so they can go down the funnel. I'm going to raise one up just a touch, and then I'll hit 3 again, hit play, and my watermelon should go through and both get chopped. If you are moving an object, a tip that they tell you is if you hold shift, your camera moves with you, so it makes it a little bit smoother to move around. So that's kind of useful. And they also talk about how we can frame our actor by pressing F, use the Alt key to kind of drag around on our scene with the middle mouse button, or left mouse and Alt to orbit that object. So these are different ways we can interact inside of our engine. So now that we've got our watermelon splitting, we want to make sure we're not making as much of a mess. And so we want to set it up so that, one, we're slicing pretty much down the middle, but also dropping into some buckets. So we're going to go into our content drawer. We're going to go content. We're going to go static meshes. And we're going to go into our tools folder where we have our toy buckets that we were using in the first lesson. So I'm going to click and drag one of those out. If it wants to work with me, there we go. Click and drag it out, and then I'll click and drag to duplicate it so that when I hit play, my watermelons go into my buckets. I don't have as much of a mess going on inside of my scene, which is great. They recommend that you might need to move your wedge up, so we can drag that up a little bit so that it is going in. I'm actually going to make mine a little bit sharper so it fits in the space a little better. And then when I hit play, they cut a little more evenly and they fall right into my buckets. So that's what I'm looking for there. So at this point we can save, Control-Shift-S, and we get into our first interface challenge. So understanding how to set up our scene a little bit better. So now we need to get 10 watermelons through our funnel without them getting stuck and making sure that they all sort into our buckets. So you need to duplicate your watermelons, arrange them in a way that they can fall without clogging up the funnel, and getting all the pieces into the buckets. All right, hopefully at this point you've done that step. You've got your 10 watermelons falling through the funnel, sorting into the buckets. And so now we can move on to our engine activity. So this is, like I said, a relatively fun one. We get to fracture using the chaos system inside of Unreal Engine. So we're going to split our watermelon into a bunch of tiny pieces. And so we're going to do that in the persistent level instead of our wedge level. So we can right click, change our streaming method to blueprint, turn off our visibility, and then in our kitchen environment, make it our current, or rather persistent level, make current. There we go. So now that our persistent level is our current level, we can go down into our content drawer. And in our static mesh folder, which we just were in, we have a food folder. Inside of that food folder, we have a watermelon folder, and we're just going to drag in this static mesh. So make sure you're dragging in the S_watermelon, not the GC watermelon, because we're going to set up our geometry collection as is. So now that we have our watermelon in, we're going to go up to where it says selection mode, head to fracture, and this is our chaos fracturing system, which allows us to do some destruction. So we're going to hit new. We're going to generate a new geometry collection. For this sake, just so that it's easy to find, we're going to keep it in that watermelon folder, and we're just going to hit the create button. If we hit our content drawer, we should see that new geometry collection in its own folder, but we don't need to worry about that quite yet, because now we can start to see our fracture coming together. And so inside of our fracture menu, we want to start to use some of these tools. So we're going to go down to the fracture menu, hit uniform, and we're going to change a few settings in here before we set it up. So we're going to fracture at a minimum. See if we can find these settings. Should be in here. There we go. Just wasn't scrolling. So I dragged down my level statistics so that I could see a little bit more of what I'm trying to change in my settings here. And I'm going to change my minimum and maximum uniform Verneuil. Let's see if we can find where those are at. So mine were underneath a drop-down menu that wasn't open. So looking for that uniform Verneuil. And we're going to set our settings to be a minimum of 10 and a maximum of 20. And then we can hit this blue fracture button, and we'll see all of those pieces highlighted here. And so if I go to look over in my fracture hierarchy, I can see that I have 14 fractures, and each of those fractures I can look at and see. And if we wanted to get really crazy, which we don't necessarily want to on our laptops, we could fracture each of these sections independently, but we're not going to worry about that. So now we can see that we've got 14 fractures set up, and now we just have to test it. So we're going to go back to our selection mode. We could do it in that fracture mode, but I'm just going to go back to selection and drag my object up. And then I want to make sure in my details panel under physics that I'm simulating physics. It should be on by default, but it's always good to check. And then if I hit play, it falls, but nothing happens. And so it's not fracturing because we haven't hit our damage thresholds. And so we need to change our damage thresholds so that we can change when this fracture would occur. So under my details panel, I can search for damage threshold, and I'll get 3 options here. And so for our first, we are just going to change that index 0 to 1. And this should allow us to fracture our watermelon. So when it falls, it fractures. Now we're seeing that fracture, it keeps the same material in it. When we fracture a watermelon, we should expect that it's got its red guts inside, that red flesh. And so what we need to do is we need to find our materials here. And we need to find where that second material is being added. And this looks like a place where something different has happened, because we've only got one in here. So let's go back into our fracture mode and check our slots. So by looking through, this workflow has changed a lot to get this internal texture in. And so I've actually brought in a second watermelon. You guys can see that. But what we need to do is we need to add a material to our watermelon. And so the way that we can do that, back in our watermelon, if we go to our static mesh, we can double click and then you can add a material slot. And so you'll just hit this plus button. You can add that watermelon inside. In my case, I can look up and add like my outside back in here again. But I'm going to end up deleting that because now that we've assigned that material to our mesh, it becomes available to us inside of our fraction mode editor. So heading back into fraction mode, fracture, making sure I'm selecting my base bone, so level 0, either in the level statistics or in the hierarchy, making sure I select watermelon 0. And then I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to find my materials utility. With my materials utility, we can double check that we have access to that asset material, see if we can see the watermelon inside. And I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to assign a material. And so I'm going to assign material 1. So going back up, we can see index number 0 is the outside, number 1 is our inside. And I'm going to apply it to internal faces. And so when I select my base level, it's going to apply it to all of the internals. I'll hit assign material. And then when I hit play, now my watermelons, when they explode, have their guts on the inside as well. So this leads into our extension activity. And so looking at how to drop some knives onto our watermelons, get them to fracture or split, change how your static mesh is going to break into smaller pieces. So playing with some of these other settings in the fracture menu. And then selecting a piece from the fracture hierarchy and fracturing that into a smaller setting. So I mentioned that you can do it. We don't want to do a whole lot of these, but doing some is a good way to explore this tool. And so that is the end of this video.